Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The late spring morning sun poured in through the high windows of the great hall, casting long beams of light that danced across the enchanted ceiling, which shimmered with soft patches of cloud drifting lazily above. The air was filled with a restless energy, the kind that always came at this time of year, when the scent of new grass and blossoming roses from the greenhouses drifted through open doors, and when the castle itself seemed to hum with anticipation of the approaching summer. At the long Slytherin table, Dorian Flint lounged in his usual seat, one arm draped casually over the back of the bench, the other idly twirling a fork between his fingers. His emerald green tie hung loosely around his neck, the top button of his crisp shirt undone in the deliberate style he'd perfected over the years. His slate-grey eyes scanned the hall with detached amusement, noting the shifting groups of seventh years huddled in excited or nervous clusters. The buzz of conversation was louder than usual today. Rumors had been flying for weeks that this year's Newt examinations would be different. And now, finally, the whispers had been confirmed. At the staff table, Headmistress McGonagall stood, her sharp gaze sweeping over the assembled students. The usual scraping of cutlery on plates faded to silence as her presence alone demanded attention. "As you are all aware," she began, her voice clear and commanding, "this year, upon the suggestion of the Department of Magical Education and with the cooperation of the Hogwarts faculty, we shall be trialing a new format for the NEWT examinations." A murmur rippled through the hall. Dorian leaned back further, lifting an eyebrow. "Here we go," he thought. McGonagall continued, "While the written theory examinations will proceed as usual, your practical assessments will take the form of individual trials, designed not only to evaluate your magical proficiency, but also your adaptability, creativity, and moral judgment." At this, the murmur grew louder. Dorian heard a loud whisper from the Gryffindor table. "Moral judgment? What's that supposed to mean?" "The trials," McGonagall pressed on, "will take place within specially prepared magical arenas. Each of you will face a series of challenges, tailored to test a range of skills and, indeed, your character. You will not be competing against one another, though of course your performance will be assessed comprehensively." A sharp smile tugged at Dorian's lips. Tailored challenges? This might actually be fun. From across the table, Blaise Travers, fellow Slytherin, tall and lean, with an ever-present smirk, leaned in, voice low and mocking. "Well, Flint," he drawled, "looks like it's your moment to shine again. What's the bet? Top score in Slytherin? Or maybe the whole year?" A few chuckles followed from nearby. Dorian flicked a crumb off his sleeve with practiced nonchalance. "Naturally," he said lazily, "wouldn't want to disappoint the house." Beside him, Adrien Rossier, a wiry boy with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper tongue, snorted. "Of course, Slytherins always have to win, don't they? Wouldn't be tradition otherwise." "Merely upholding expectations," Dorian replied with mock gravity, though inwardly a knot had begun to form low in his stomach. He kept his expression carefully composed, but the words of the headmistress echoed in his mind. Moral judgment, character. That was new. That was unpredictable. For years, Dorian had excelled in the practical aspects of magic. Dueling, charms, transfiguration. He had a flair for them, a precision and confidence that professors admired, even if some, like McGonagall, suspected he sometimes used his talents for mischief. But this character test, that was harder to prepare for, harder to fake. He remembered the countless expectations heaped upon him since childhood, from his father, a prominent figure in the Department of International Magical Cooperation, and his mother, a pure-blood witch with a sharp eye for social standing. Flints always excel, Dorian, his father had told him more times than he could count. We don't falter, we don't fail. But here was an exam where clever spellwork and smooth words might not be enough, where it might come down to who you were beneath the polished surface. And what if that wasn't enough? His fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the table. He caught Blaise watching him with a knowing grin. "Nervous, Flint?" Blaise teased. Dorian's lips curved into an easy smirk. "Please, if anyone should be worried, it's you. Imagine a test where charm alone won't get you through." That earned a laugh from Adrian and a few others nearby. The conversation moved on, and Dorian allowed the familiar mask of confidence to settle back over him. But the knot in his stomach remained. He glanced toward the staff table again. McGonagall had resumed her seat, now conferring quietly with Professor Flitwick. Across from them, Professor Hawthorne, the newly appointed Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, observed the hall with her usual composed, unreadable expression. Rumor had it she'd been an unspeakable before joining the staff. Dorian met her gaze briefly. It held no warmth, but there was an unmistakable glint of curiosity, as though she was already calculating which students might surprise her in the trials. The clatter of benches signaled the end of breakfast. Students began filing out in groups, chattering excitedly about the trials. Some, like the Gryffindors, were already speculating about heroic feats they might perform. Ravenclaws debated which spells would be most strategically useful. Hufflepuffs spoke nervously about teamwork and preparedness. Dorian rose, slinging his bag over one shoulder. Blaise clapped him on the back. "Well then, Flint, we'll see if your reputation holds up." With a crooked smile, Dorian replied smoothly, "Naturally, wouldn't be Slytherin otherwise." But as he strode from the great hall, boots clicking smartly against the stone floor, a single thought nagged at him beneath the cool exterior. This time, it isn't about the show. It's about what's underneath. And that, he knew, was a far more dangerous test. The morning had passed in a blur of anticipation. The castle seemed more alive than usual. Staircases humming faintly with shifting magic, portraits whispering excitedly to one another, and groups of seventh years darting about the corridors, faces bright with nervous energy. Everywhere Dorian turned, the words "graduation trials" hung in the air like an incantation. His own schedule had been delivered by owl post at breakfast, a single sheet of parchment, elegantly written in emerald ink. Dorian Flint, Slytherin faculty. Trial time, 3:15 p.m. Arena 2, East Wing. Short, simple, no clues as to what lay ahead. Now, as the castle clock tower chimed 3 times, Dorian found himself striding alone through the quieter eastern corridors. His green and silver robes fluttered softly around his ankles, wand holstered neatly at his side. He kept his pace measured, movements languid, but his heart drummed a steady rhythm beneath the crisp fabric of his shirt. Calm, Flint. It's just another test. Like dueling club, like defense class, like every cursed ministry interview father ever made you sit through. But despite the cool mask he wore, a current of unease stirred beneath. The east wing was seldom used, an older part of the castle, where the stones seemed to hum with ancient enchantments. The portraits here were faded with age, their inhabitants more reserved, watching silently as Dorian passed. The further he walked, the fewer students he saw. At last he reached a pair of towering doors carved from dark oak, inlaid with serpentine patterns that shimmered faintly in the low torchlight. Above the archway, a single inscription had been etched into the stone: Ed Fortitudinem, to courage. Dorian tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at one corner of his mouth. Courage? How very Gryffindor! But even as he thought it, the words struck a chord. He exhaled slowly, smoothing a crease in his sleeve, then stepped forward. The doors swung open without a sound, revealing a descending stone passage lit by flickering blue torches. The air was cool and dry, carrying a faint scent of old stone and something deeper, magic, thick and ancient. At the threshold stood Professor Vector, one of the few staff members involved in managing the trials. The arithmancy mistress inclined her head slightly as Dorian approached. "Mr. Flint," she said, voice calm, "when you are ready." Dorian gave a languid nod. "Always ready, Professor." A faint gleam of amusement flickered in her gaze. "We shall see." Without another word, she gestured him through. The doors closed silently behind him. The passage wound downward, each step echoing faintly in the confined space. As he descended, Dorian became acutely aware of how the air seemed to change, denser, charged with invisible threads of enchantment that prickled along his skin. Finally, the corridor opened into a vast circular chamber. The stone here was darker, polished to an almost mirror-like sheen. The ceiling arched high overhead, lost in shadow, and the air held a deep, resonant stillness. Blue flames flickered in wall-mounted sconces, casting long, dancing shadows across the floor. The center of the room was empty, for now. Dorian paused at the threshold, taking it in with practiced calm. "So this is the arena," he thought. "Not bad." His boots clicked softly against the floor as he stepped inside, the sound swallowed quickly by the heavy air. In the center of the chamber, a faint circle of runes glowed beneath the stone, intricate, shifting patterns that seemed to respond to his presence. He let out a quiet breath, straightened his shoulders, and allowed the familiar smirk to return to his lips. "Well then, Flint, time to make an entrance." He strode forward with deliberate poise, coming to stand just within the circle. For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched. Then a deep, low hum resonated through the chamber, like the stirring of some great, slumbering magic. The runes beneath his feet flared to life, lines of silver light racing outward in intricate patterns. The torches dimmed. The room seemed to draw inward, the edges of the chamber blurring slightly, as though the space itself were shifting. Dorian felt the first true stirrings of tension in his chest. His fingers brushed the edge of his wand holster, not yet drawing it, but ready. The voice that followed seemed to come from the very walls. "Candidate acknowledged. Trial begins. Arena adapting." The floor beneath him vibrated subtly, and before his eyes the chamber began to change. Stone flowed like water, columns rising from the floor, archways twisting into new shapes. The once empty room transformed rapidly, reshaping itself into an environment drawn not from any standard defense class, but from something deeper. From me, Dorian realized, a chill prickling down his spine. It's reacting to me. A faint haze rolled in from the edges of the space, not fog, but shimmering like magic itself. Within moments, the arena had become a dark, twisting maze of stone and shadow, narrow corridors winding between tall columns, their surfaces etched with unfamiliar glyphs. Somewhere, faint whispers echoed, words just out of reach. Dorian's smirk flickered. The iron control in his posture held, but he could feel the knot in his stomach tightening. This was no simple spellcasting exam. This was a test of more than magic. A soft click echoed behind him, the sound of a door sealing shut. The way back had vanished. He was alone now. The arena had closed. The trial had begun. With a slow, deliberate motion, Dorian drew his wand, fingers steady despite the pulse quickening beneath his skin. "I suppose we're dancing now," he murmured to the shadows, voice low, sardonic. And with that, he stepped forward into the maze, the faint smile still playing at his lips, but the sharp gleam of readiness burning in his eyes. The stone corridor narrowed as Dorian advanced, the shimmering haze thickening around him. The twisting passages of the arena seemed to shift almost imperceptibly as he moved, just enough to make every turn feel unfamiliar, every glance behind him subtly wrong. It was as though the space itself was alive, watching, waiting. He kept his pace steady, wand held low but ready, the tip occasionally casting a faint trail of silver light along the walls. The whispered voices had faded, replaced by a deeper, heavier silence that pressed against his senses. Then the corridor opened into a small antechamber. Before him stood a set of tall double doors wrought from polished obsidian, their surfaces smooth and seamless, without handle or visible keyhole. Strange runes traced their surface in faint lines of blue light, pulsing gently in time with some unseen rhythm. Dorian approached, gaze narrowing. The doors radiated magic, dense, intricate, layered. A simple Alohomora won't cut it, he thought, smirking faintly, but it'd be rude not to at least try. He twirled his wand once, sharply, the gesture smooth from long practice. "Alohomora," he intoned crisply. A thin thread of golden light snaked toward the doors and was instantly absorbed. The runes flared briefly in response and then faded, as though unimpressed. Dorian let out a breath through his nose, the smirk still lingering at the corners of his mouth. Didn't think so. He took a step back, surveying the doors more closely. The runes weren't static. They shifted subtly beneath the surface, flowing in patterns that seemed responsive. He reached out with his wand, tracing the air before the doors without touching them. The tip glowed faintly where it neared the surface, shimmering as though passing through layers of enchantment. Multiple wards, he realized, interlocking, possibly keyed to intent as well as spellwork. He tilted his head, considering. The obvious path, brute force, was unlikely to succeed, not here. If this arena had been designed to test flexibility, the solution wouldn't be sheer power. Still, it was worth confirming the limits. With a flick of his wrist, he summoned a more forceful spell. Expulso! The blast of blue light struck the doors, only to rebound harmlessly into the air, absorbed with barely a flicker. The chamber remained utterly still. Dorian let the smirk fade, exhaling slowly. "All right," he murmured, "no shortcuts." He paced once around the chamber, boots echoing softly against the polished floor. The arena's air felt thicker here, charged with expectation. He could almost sense the enchantments watching him, weighing his choices. For a moment, the old instinct surged, the urge to act fast, to perform, to seize control, put on a show, impress, win. But that hadn't worked in the last few moments, had it? He stilled, gaze steady on the doors. "Think, Flint, you're not on a dueling platform. This isn't about flash." He inhaled, let the breath out slowly. His eyes traced the runes again, not just the pattern now, but the rhythm, the flow. And then it struck him. They're reacting. They want something layered, sequential, a conversation, not a single answer. A faint grin tugged at his lips. This was more like a game of chess than a duel. He raised his wand again, this time slower, more deliberate. "Specialis Revelio," he whispered. The runes responded. A faint web of additional glyphs shimmered into view across the doors and surrounding archway. Layers of protective charms woven with older enchantments, perhaps even keyed to the caster's emotional state. Dorian's grin sharpened. Clever. He began testing gently. A light finite incantatem here, a subtle harmonia nectere passus there. Each spell drew a faint reaction from the runes, some fading, others shifting, but the doors remained sealed. He paused again, considering. The patterns, they weren't entirely uniform. One set of runes near the base pulsed out of sync with the others, slower, deeper. Anchor glyphs, he realized, that's the key. He crouched slightly, focusing on that section, wand steady. Partis temporis, he intoned, sending a thin blade of temporal disruption toward the glyphs. The runes flickered, some destabilizing, others flaring bright. Progress. But as he rose, the air thickened suddenly. The arena responded, shifting subtly, the floor beneath his boots seeming to tilt just enough to throw balance off. A test of focus. Good. Dorian planted his stance firmly, breath slow, steady. "Calmer," he murmured, casting a grounding charm on himself. The sensation of imbalance faded slightly. He returned his attention to the doors. The primary wards were weakening, but the final lock remained. Intent, he thought again. This was designed to force more than spell work. They want thought, precision, purpose. He considered briefly, then drew in a slow breath, focusing inward. With a clear mind, steady voice, he spoke. Aperio. Not shouted, not forced, spoken as an expression of intent. The runes shivered, and slowly, with a deep, resonant hum, the doors began to part, edges glowing softly. Dorian allowed a satisfied breath to escape. Not showy, not brute force, measured, controlled. As the doors opened fully, revealing a dimly lit corridor beyond, he allowed himself a small, wry smile. "Lesson 1, he murmured, "don't rush." He stepped through without hesitation, boots clicking softly on the stone once more. Behind him, the doors sealed silently, leaving only the faint shimmer of fading runes in the air. The corridor beyond the black doors was narrower than the first, the air thicker, damp with a sharp undercurrent of earthy scent. Dorian's boots echoed softly on the stone as he advanced, wand held before him in a cautious, ready grip. The shimmering haze had faded, replaced by a dim greenish glow that seemed to seep from the very walls. The faint scent of moss and something far less pleasant, bitter, acrid, grew stronger with each step. As he rounded a curve, the space widened again, revealing a long, low chamber choked with dense foliage. Thick vines coiled across the walls and ceiling, their leaves broad and glistening with an oily sheen. Strange blossoms hung from twisted stems, some emitting faint puffs of iridescent spores. Along the floor, tangled roots pulsed faintly beneath the surface, as though alive. Dorian narrowed his eyes. A poison garden, he thought grimly, subtle. At the far end of the chamber, another set of doors stood closed, this time wrought from pale stone veined with green, nearly blending with the plants that half obscured them. No obvious lock, no visible mechanism. But between him and the exit, the air shimmered faintly, distorting the view. A soft mist drifted through the foliage, not natural fog, but something enchanted. And judging by the growing tightness in his throat, it wasn't merely for show. He drew a steady breath, shallow, careful, and conjured a light shielding charm around his face. Protectus Aeris. A faint bubble of clean air formed around him, though he could already feel the spell's strain against the creeping influence of the mist. Not sustainable, he assessed. I'll need something stronger or an antidote. His gaze swept the room, noting familiar and unfamiliar shapes among the flora. Several plants he recognized from Professor Longbottom's classes, variants of devil's snare, certain species of venomous tentacula, and, near the center, a patch of withering spurge, its pale blossoms trembling slightly. And there, along the left wall, a cluster of green-veined nightshade, its berries gleaming ominously. Dorian's mind shifted into a sharper focus, years of study slotting into place. Airborne toxins, alkaloid-based, inhalation likely leads to paralysis, perhaps hallucinations. Slow onset, but cumulative. He reached instinctively for the small pouch at his belt, standard issue for the trials, and withdrew a slim vial of universal antidote. The potion shimmered faintly within the glass. For a moment, he hesitated. Father would say, use the tools provided, efficiency first, no shame in the obvious solution. His jaw tensed. He uncorked the vial, swirling the contents briefly. Better simple than stupid, he muttered under his breath, voice edged with irony. Raising the vial, he cast a minor dispersal charm, diffundo, sending a fine mist of the antidote into the surrounding air. At first, the result seemed promising. The mist wavered slightly, thinning near the edges. But then a pulse, subtle but unmistakable. The foliage shivered. The pulsing roots beneath the floor glowed brighter, and the oily sheen on the leaves intensified. The acrid tang in the air sharpened, burning faintly in the back of his throat despite the shielding charm. Dorian narrowed his eyes. Reactive wards, he thought grimly. It's keyed to punish brute solutions. Of course it is. He swore softly under his breath, capping the vial and slipping it away. Father's way would have backfired completely. The knot in his chest loosened slightly with the admission, oddly freeing.
So, not the shortcut. Let's try this my way. He crouched near the edge of the foliage, wand sweeping carefully through the air. Specialis Revelio. A faint shimmer outlined the mist's structure, thin tendrils of magic weaving through the air, linked to the roots below. It's being generated, not just present. His gaze flicked to the withering spurge, its blossoms pulsing in rhythm with the mist. There, target the source, not the symptom.
He rose smoothly, moving with controlled precision through the outer edge of the chamber, keeping to the least choked paths. His shielding charm flickered, strained. Time was limited. Near the spurge he paused, studying the plant's structure. "Axio, mandrake root," he intoned softly. From a nearby pot, half hidden among the vines, a shriveled mandrake root floated toward him, its form curled in dormant state. Dorian caught it deftly, slicing a thin sliver with a flick of his wand. Working quickly now, he withdrew a small silver mortar from his pouch, adding the mandrake and a few crushed nightshade berries, carefully balanced to counteract the spurge's alkaloids without compounding the toxicity. A whispered incantation, a swift grinding motion, the mixture emitted a faint blue vapor. "Vaporum purgo," Dorian commanded, channeling the vapor into the air. The effect was subtle at first. The mist hesitated, wavered, then began to thin, retreating slightly from the area around him. Encouraged, he pressed on, repeating the process in stages as he advanced toward the far doors. The oppressive atmosphere lightened, and his breathing grew easier. By the time he reached the threshold, the worst of the toxins had dissipated. He exhaled slowly, glancing at the untouched vial of universal antidote still in his pouch. Father would have used it immediately, he thought, lips quirking in a wry smile. But sometimes it pays to understand the problem first. With a flick of his wand, he swept the remaining vines from the stone doors, revealing another inscription: "To wisdom through patience." Dorian snorted softly. "Cheeky," he muttered, "but fair enough." He pressed his wand to the center rune, and the doors slid open with a deep, resonant hum. Beyond lay another corridor, dim and silent. Dorian straightened his shoulders, the familiar smirk returning to his lips, but now touched with a glimmer of something steadier beneath. "Lesson 2, he mused as he stepped forward. "Sometimes slow wins the race." And with that, he moved deeper into the heart of the trials. The passage grew colder as Dorian advanced, the air so still it seemed to press against his skin. His wand cast a thin beam of silver light ahead, but it barely pierced the creeping darkness. The stone beneath his boots was old, cracked in places, as though no feet had passed this way for centuries. He could feel it now, that familiar hum of deep magic woven tightly through the very air. Defense next, he thought grimly. It fits the pattern. He rounded a final corner, and the corridor opened into a vast circular chamber. Cold flooded over him at once. His breath frosted in the air. The space was immense, the ceiling lost in shadow. The floor was polished obsidian, smooth as glass. But the center of the room was dominated by a swirling mass of black mist, thick and restless, tendrils of shadow coiling outward in slow, hungry spirals. Dorian halted just beyond the threshold, eyes narrowing. That's no ordinary spell work, he thought. Not a dementor, no soul drain, something constructed, crafted. The tendrils writhed toward him, almost tasting the air. A shadow construct, responsive, semi-sentient. The familiar voice of Professor Hawthorne echoed in his memory. Against constructs, direct force is useless. Understanding is paramount. He circled warily, wand raised. Protego Maxima! A shimmering shield flared to life, encasing him in a sphere of pale light. For a moment, the construct pulsed, tendrils hesitating. Then it struck. A lash of shadow slammed against the shield with bone-jarring force. Dorian staggered, boots skidding on the slick floor. Damn, stronger than expected. He repositioned, heart hammering faster now. Lumos Solem! A beam of brilliant sunlight burst from his wand. The shadow recoiled violently, retreating toward the center. A sharp grin flickered across Dorian's face. Weak to light, then. Good. He pressed forward, but even as he moved, the construct shifted. A deeper pulse rippled through it, and suddenly the chamber darkened further. And with it came the voices. Not good enough, Dorian. Father will be watching. Slytherins don't hesitate. Failure is weakness. The words weren't real, but they echoed inside him with painful clarity. Mental assault, he realized grimly, and keyed to my doubts. Clever. The shield flickered. Another tendril smashed into it, cracks spidering through the surface. Can't hold this position. Revelio Malefica! The spell traced the structure of the construct, a central core bound by layers of fear-based enchantments. It feeds on hesitation. And just as he prepared to act, a flicker of motion caught his eye. Across the chamber, a section of wall shimmered, and a hidden alcove revealed itself. Inside, trapped within a warded sigil, was another student. A girl, tangled dark hair, Gryffindor robes torn. Chains of dark magic bound her, magic pulsing through the circle beneath her feet. Elira Vance, Dorian recognized her at once. 7th year, decent and dueling. Her head jerked up, eyes wide, desperate. Help, please! A knot twisted hard in Dorian's chest. Of course, he thought grimly, the arena's forcing this choice. He flicked his gaze back to the construct. The core pulsed, exposed. He could strike now, end the trial quickly, efficiently. That's what they expect, the voice of his father whispered inside his mind. Efficiency first, no room for weakness, win no matter what. And if I don't? Another voice whispered, his own. He hesitated, heart pounding. Help her, and you risk losing. Fail, and the house looks at you differently. Father looks at you differently. For a moment, the voices inside him clashed, louder than the shadow's whispers. But what do I want? The image of the girl, trapped, terrified, cut through the noise. He drew a sharp breath, steady, grounding. Damn the points. Decision snapped into place like the click of a lock. He pivoted sharply, sprinting toward the alcove. Protego Totalum, he cast over his shoulder. A dome of shimmering light flared, blocking the nearest tendril. Hold just a little longer, he muttered. He reached the warded circle, chains pulsing in time with the construct's energy. Chain curse, emotional resonance, keyed to fear. Not force, harmony. He crouched, wand moving in swift, precise arcs. "Elira, listen to me." Her eyes locked on his, wild with panic. "It's feeding on your fear. You have to fight it. Breathe. Focus." She gasped, shaking, but drew a breath. Again. The sigils dimmed ever so slightly. "Good," Dorian murmured. "Now hold that. Harmonia nectere passus." A wave of balancing energy rippled through the circle. The chains flickered. A deep pulse from the construct struck the chamber. His wards shuddered. Not fast enough. He gritted his teeth, shifting tactics. Empathia severe. A fine blade of light traced the bindings, slicing through the emotional resonance. With a sharp crack, the chains shattered. Elira collapsed forward. Dorian caught her, pulling her upright. "Move," he ordered. They sprinted, the construct howling in rage. "Ardura lux!" A burst of searing white light forced the shadows back, but only momentarily. "Can't win in a headlong fight," he thought grimly. "Have to change the field." He pivoted, eyes scanning the chamber. Anchor runes must be linked to the floor. He dropped to one knee, wand sweeping the ground. "Revelio!" Faint runes glimmered beneath the obsidian, pulsing with the shadow's rhythm. "There," he pointed sharply. "Ruptura vincula!" A targeted pulse lanced into the runes. The shadow construct shrieked, destabilizing. He seized the moment. "Elira, cover your eyes!" "Lumas maxima!" A blinding sphere of light burst outward. The construct imploded in a vortex of dark mist, vanishing with a final wail. For a moment, the chamber was still, save for Dorian's ragged breathing. He lowered his wand slowly. Elira leaned against the wall, trembling. You didn't have to," she whispered. "I know," Dorian said quietly, "but I chose to." Their eyes met, not gratitude alone, but understanding passing between them. A soft chime echoed, the chamber acknowledging the trial's completion. A new passage opened ahead. Dorian exhaled, slower now. Lesson 3, he thought. The right choice isn't always the efficient one. He glanced back at Elira. "You up for finishing this?" She nodded, still pale but steadier. "Good, let's go." Together they stepped into the next corridor. Shadows behind them, choices made. The corridor beyond the shadowed chamber was long and oddly quiet. No more traps, no more curses, no more screaming shadows. But in Dorian's chest, the battle still echoed. Each step forward felt heavier, as though the very air weighed on him now. The edges of his sleeves were scorched from the last blast of shadow magic. His wand hand trembled faintly, though he kept it steady. Elira moved beside him, one arm pressed lightly to her ribs, breathing uneven. Her robes were torn, but her grip on her wand was firm. For a time, neither spoke. The corridor was too narrow, the silence too dense. But Dorian's mind churned, faster than his feet. I didn't have to help her. I could have won, alone. Father would have expected that. And yet, I didn't. That thought alone unsettled him more than the entire trial so far. It wasn't calculation, it wasn't strategy. I chose for me. The weight of that realization pressed deeper with each step. Not guilt, not exactly, but a strange new discomfort. For the first time, he wondered not how others would see him after this trial, but how he would. "You're changing, Flint," he thought bitterly. "Hope you survive it." Ahead, a soft pulse of silver light shimmered through the stones. Elira finally broke the silence, voice quiet and hoarse. What do you think is next?" Dorian swallowed, forcing calm into his voice. "If the pattern holds, something personal," he said. "Not another fight, a final choice." "Another choice?" He almost laughed, but it caught in his throat. "Seems to be the theme of the day," he muttered. A pause, then, softer, "I think they want to see who we are, really." Elira glanced at him, but whatever reply she might have made was cut off as they rounded a final bend. The corridor opened. The final chamber was vast, but not grand in the way of the dueling arenas or cursed halls. It was almost plain. A wide circular room, polished stone beneath their feet. The air shimmered faintly, as though layered with wards too ancient to name. At the far end stood a single archway, tall, elegant, crafted of pale stone veined with silver. Above it, an inscription pulsed softly. To pass beyond, one must face the truth within. A low chime echoed through the space as they stepped inside. A voice, calm, neither male nor female, filled the air. "You have chosen. You have acted. Now choose again. See who you are." Dorian tensed. Of course, he thought grimly, a mirror test. He turned to Elira. "Stay back. These tests, they're often keyed to the individual." She hesitated, but nodded. "Be careful." He stepped forward alone. The arch shimmered, and the space before it twisted. A figure stepped forth. His own face. But this Dorian stood straighter, colder, robes immaculate, wand held with casual superiority. The eyes gleamed with ambition, sharp and empty. The Dorian who wins, alone, without hesitation. Father would be proud of him. For a long, frozen moment, Dorian stared. And the whispers began. Slytherins don't waste time on weakness. Efficiency first. Compassion is a liability. You could have left her. You would have won faster. The words pressed hard, old lessons drilled into him since childhood. The voice of his father, precise, relentless. And yet, I didn't. Why? The reflection smirked, a perfect echo of Dorian's most practiced expression. "Because you're weak," it whispered. "Because you wanted to be liked. Because you're soft." His grip on his wand tightened, knuckles white. "No, because I chose to be more than that. I chose for myself." The reflection's smirk deepened, and suddenly it struck. A pulse of cold magic surged outward, slamming into Dorian's shields. "Protego Maxima!" The barrier flared, but cracked under the force. The reflection advanced, radiating pressure. "Face it, Flint," the whispers pressed. "You're afraid of who you really are." He gritted his teeth. "I'm afraid of becoming this," he admitted. And the moment the thought formed, a flicker ran through the reflection. Truth weakens it, he realized. He stepped forward. "I am ambitious," he said aloud. I value strength. Another pulse, weaker. But I also value choice. Another step. And I chose to help, not for points, not for victory, because it mattered to me. The reflection wavered, flickering at the edges. Because this is who I am now. With that, he raised his wand, steady, sure. Finite reflections. A pulse of pure will, not force, rippled through the chamber. The reflection shuddered and shattered into a rain of silver motes. Silence followed, deep and resonant. The arch ahead flared, silver light flowing through its surface. The voice returned. Choice shapes strength. The path is open. Dorian exhaled, slow, controlled. Behind him, Elira approached cautiously. "You," she began, eyes wide. He turned to meet her gaze fully, no mask now. "It was hard," he admitted, "harder than anything else." She swallowed. "Thank you," she said softly, "for back there, for not leaving me." For a moment he almost replied with a quip, but something in her expression stopped him. Instead, he nodded. "I didn't do it to impress anyone," he said quietly. "I did it because I wanted to." Her smile, tired but genuine, was all the answer needed. Together they stepped toward the arch. As they passed beneath it, a final pulse of light washed over them, cool, cleansing. A sense of completion settled in Dorian's chest. Lesson 4, he thought. Who you choose to be, that's what matters. And as the final corridor opened before them, Dorian Flint, for perhaps the first time, walked forward not as the son of expectations, not as a Slytherin trying to perform, but as himself. The first thing Dorian noticed when he stepped through the final archway wasn't the light, though it was bright after the shadows of the arena. It was the quiet hum of voices and the presence of others. A wide antechamber had been prepared just beyond the trial halls, its polished floor gleaming beneath floating lanterns. Along the walls stood members of the Hogwarts staff, their expressions composed but watchful. A small group of seventh years already lingered there, some pale and shaken, others with wary, uncertain smiles. The air held an odd energy, not relief, not triumph, but reflection. As Dorian and Elira crossed the threshold, a soft chime echoed, acknowledging their passage. Professor McGonagall herself stood near the center of the room, robes immaculate, her sharp gaze tracking each new arrival. Beside her, Professor Hawthorne stood with arms folded, her expression as unreadable as ever. But her eyes lingered briefly on Dorian with a flicker of something like approval? Or curiosity, Dorian thought grimly, hard to tell with her. McGonagall's voice rang out, calm, clear. "Congratulations! You have completed the trials." A ripple moved through the students. "Today's tests were not about spells alone," she continued. "They were designed to reveal strength of mind, of heart, of choice." Her gaze swept across them, lingering just for a breath on Dorian. "For some of you, what you faced will shape the kind of witches and wizards you choose to become." Dorian's throat tightened slightly, more than he'd expected. "You will receive formal feedback in due course," McGonagall finished. But know this, passing these halls is, in itself, a mark of growth. She inclined her head. Well done. There was no grand applause, no flashy display, just quiet acknowledgement, and somehow that felt more real than any house points ever could. Professor Hawthorne's voice followed, lower, cooler. You may return to your common rooms, rest, reflect. Some lessons are not learned with a wand. Dorian exhaled slowly. Around him, students began to drift away, in pairs, in silence, some too shaken to speak. Elira touched his arm lightly. "Thank you," she whispered again, "truly." Dorian gave a faint nod, but words felt heavy on his tongue. Not here, he thought, not yet. Later. He inclined his head, and with that turned toward the lower halls, toward the dungeons, toward the one place in the castle where he could think without eyes on him. The corridors grew cooler with each step, familiar, but somehow, tonight, they felt different. So did he. By the time he reached the entrance to the Slytherin common room, the adrenaline had long since faded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and something else, a tension in his chest that no duel or potion could ease. "Pure blood," he whispered at the door, and it swung open with a hiss of ancient stone. The Slytherin common room was mostly empty at this hour, most students still lingering upstairs, waiting for the full results of the day's trials to be posted. Only a few sixth years were scattered here and there, speaking in low voices. The greenish light of the underwater windows bathed the room in its usual eerie glow, but tonight it felt quieter, softer. Dorian crossed the space without a word, shedding his outer robe and sinking into one of the deep leather chairs by the hearth. The emerald flames of the enchanted fireplace flickered lazily, casting rippling shadows across the dark wood and polished stone. For a long time he simply sat, elbows resting on his knees, wand still in hand, gaze fixed on the heart of the flames. And for the first time all day, he let himself feel it. Not triumph, not pride, something quieter, heavier. I could have walked past her. The thought surfaced unbidden, stark and clear. I could have won, alone. That's what they would have expected, what father would have expected. The fire cracked softly, but even as the thought formed, he knew, with a certainty deeper than any spell, that he couldn't have done it. Not now, not after everything. He had chosen, and he had chosen differently. Not because of the arena, not because of the rules, because it had mattered to him. The trial wasn't about magic, he realized slowly, watching the green flames dance. It was about who you are when no one is watching. The truth of it settled deep in his chest, uncomfortable at first, then strangely freeing. And who I was today wasn't who they trained me to be. A faint smile, tired, genuine, touched the corner of his mouth. And maybe that's not a bad thing. He leaned back at last, gaze drifting to the shadows along the far wall. I'll still fight. I'll still win, but not at any cost. Not if it means losing this. He wasn't sure yet what this was. Not fully. But he knew, whatever path lay ahead after Hogwarts, it would no longer be shaped by what others expected of him. He would shape it himself. And maybe, he thought, as the flames flickered softer still, that's what real strength is.